Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review All My Friends Hate Me. So, this is a birthday party film that is to be this kind of different kind of approach to a birthday party, where it seems that Pete is to go to this party, and a number of his friends all are to hate him, it seems, or to seem to make his life a lot more challenging, or are to go on and just find certain things to really just drive Pete to almost tears, because Pete is to go on and just be like, I don't know why all my friends hate me. Like, I know it's probably been a while since we've been together, but still, I don't know why these people are acting this way. So one thing that I kind of want to get out of the way, if a lot of people have consistently been onto the channel, and as you can kind of see here, normally I would go on and I would do every review by holding this thing called a tablet that I'm recording with. I would consistently hold this for a number of hours every day. Boo-hoo, right? But it seems like now I have the ability, because I had gotten a gift from, of course, my parents, just being honest. And so now, we have this tripod setup. So now I can go on and just be able to do this absolutely hands-free. And that's great, because really I was just kind of assuming it's man, just after a while I would just kind of get used to holding it. It'd be a thing to get used to at certain points. Freaking hand would just have these it would feel like arthritis kind of days. But anyways, I would just kind of it'd be calluses that you'd kind of just get used to. But hey, finally at the end of the day, hands free. So if sound doesn't sound like how it normally is, maybe I sound further away than in normal videos, or if I sound whatever, then let me know in the comments below, and I'll be able to hopefully adjust via other videos. And if this is your first time around, you will have no clue what I'm even talking about. So thank you for watching this video regardless. So, All My Friends Hate Me. I was actually very surprised by this movie. I actually liked this movie, even though, again, I was like, man, this movie gets more and more dark of a film. But weirdly, I was kind of I felt better about this film than I was just kind of thinking. I'm like, man, this movie's probably gonna get boring, or it's probably gonna I don't think I'm gonna enjoy this movie or like this film. But I ended up just weirdly liking it, and a lot of people could go on to possibly feel the same or not feel the same. At the end of the day, currently right now this is on YouTube's and Vudu's, and it's a premium access movie for a couple bucks. And so if you want to go out of your way to rent this movie, I wouldn't blame you, but I'm also going to give you a free way to say that you can see this movie also. So, so going on, you can go into a Google search and search the word letter C movies, and then app afterwards. You can go on and hopefully be able to find this app within some search engine, download this app, be able to, in fact, see whatever you want, brand new releases, premium access stuff, content that is normally exclusively on certain apps, you can dare in fact watch right now for absolutely free. You can go also onto an app called Fox HD Movies. When you go through and search this through Google search, realize that justifiably or rightfully, the logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say Play 1080p HD Movies. Go on, and hopefully after you download both those apps, you should be able to watch whatever you like. Basically, there won't be any kind of you can endlessly see movies consistently for absolutely free. You can also go on to a Google Play Store search. I can't exactly guarantee you if this movie is going to be listed upon this app, but I'm going to recommend this anyways. There's go onto the Google Play store and be able to search the word TV Crush. You're gonna find an app that says HD Movies with a crown off the side. Go on and be able to download that app. Be able at the end of the day to say that you can see a number of movies for absolutely free. Again, this movie may not be on there, but you can just go on and just kind of surf and watch a number of movies for absolutely free on a phone like thing. And maybe at some point this movie might be on there. Not quite sure. At the end of the day, let's go out of our way to I can kind of possibly tee this movie up. There is kind of very little information really here to really go on and tee up, but I can go on and do that. So we have our Pete is going to this party talking to his girlfriend Sonia, and it seems that Pete is to have this weird, goofy nickname that they ended up calling him like Skippy, because I guess he's the life of the party, uh, and so like we have Pete that's like, you know what, I really like. It's been a while since I've seen these friends, but like we have Pete who wants to have Sonia come to this party because Pete is to really want to finally seal the deal with Sonia to be engaged with her. And why not have him go to this party to show to his friends that he's going to be engaged with Sonia here? So Pete is to go off to this place first, and then Sonia is to be there sometime afterwards. So Pete is to all of a sudden go to this place and just kind of wait for a very long stretch of time for all of his friends. And then all of a sudden, Pete is to all of a sudden find out that there seems to be a extra guy than would be normally because they just found this guy somewhere and they just thought like, hey, this guy seems like fun. Let's kind of throw him into the whole mix of things and like see what happens. It seems that Pete is to get very much more either offended or uncomfortable, or it seems like this guy keeps going on and making Pete more and more suspicious to the point of Pete going on and noticing that this guy, who of course is Harry, is to consistently write things down in this notebook. So Pete is to just be so uncomfortable with this guy around and just uncomfortable with his friends, it starts to become, because it seems like every one of his friends more and more are to say that like, man, like you're really crap at this party. And Pete's like, what? Like, yeah, like, man, you're just kind of like throwing all of this stuff in all these people's faces, and like you're saying all these horrible things to people. And Pete's like, what? So the further and further we go along, we have these people that it just feels like opposite day, where if Pete's saying something nice, they'll turn around and just be like, well, man, you were being such a pain. And it's so weird. It's such a weird birthday party. And so at the end of the day, like, I'm going to go on into spoilers and talk about that a little bit more. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers, and we'll go into a little bit more detail than what I did via the beginning of this this little cryptic part here. So let's go into spoilers. Let's go on and double five this bad boy up. Let me know in the comments below how if you went on and saw this movie somehow or another. All my friends hate me. Let me know how you felt about this movie. Or really, if you seem to be interested in this film after I got on and explained it, or maybe went even into spoilers, and you're just like, okay, maybe there is something here that really is intriguing. I actually was surprised by this film. I actually enjoyed it, even though there's this very dark story towards the end of the film where it's like, wow, like so technically P really comes off as a nice guy, but everybody, I think, at some point probably has a secret And so Pete is to have a very interesting secret that all of a sudden is like, wow, okay. So with that said, let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the time you spoil this movie. So Pete, of course, is talking to Sonia, and so it seems that one of Pete's friends, of course, to have this nickname, and I believe her name was Fig. So we go in and we have Sonia who's asking Pete for what his nickname is, and he, of course, is say like Skippy because he's the life of the party, or it just kind of feels like Skipper. So we have it where Pete is to go on to make it to this mansion, and he is trying to like he is so lost. It's been a while since he's gone to this location, and so all of a sudden we go on to have Pete that like kind of roll his window down, and is now going on and asking a guy named Norman for directions. So Pete, of course, is asking Norman. It's like, well, hey, like, could you give me directions for this manor? And Norman is like, well, I could. He's like, well, could you? And so Norman's like, oh yeah, all right. So Norman goes on and is to tell him like, hey, like go this direction, go here, go there, and maybe later I might go on and I might meet you there. And Pete's like, oh yeah, like I hope you do. Yeah. So all of a sudden Pete is to go to the direction of which that he was to get told, and he is to find this place. So Pete all of a sudden is to go on and is just kind of at this place. He can kind of go right in and weirdly there's like nobody there. He's just kind of looking around trying to figure out where any of these people really are. So we have Pete that is like waiting for so long, and this is like hours. All of a sudden Pete is to go on here, and he's like putting blankets on, like he's starting to get really cold. He's even falling asleep because he's been waiting for so long. And all of a sudden we have his friends that finally show up, and Pete is like, oh, like where have you guys been? Like where have you guys it's been a while. So all of a sudden we go on and we have like their friends who are like, oh, I thought you got lost, or I thought like you had problems or something. And Pete's like, no, like I've been here for a while. Like I've been here. And they're like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, like I'm fine. Like, okay, let's get this party off. Because he's just kind of been waiting from, assuming, numerous hours, to the point of him like dozing off because he's been waiting so long. So all of a sudden, we have Pete's friends that are introducing Harry into the mix. And we had at one point where Pete, before he was to make it to this party, he went on and he saw this dog. And this dog is kind of, it seems, the dog didn't look in the best of health. And so Pete goes on and is to kind of further venture to find this car with some homeless man in it. And so Pete is just kind of like going into this car and be like, and all of a sudden this homeless man comes bursting out of this car, and like Pete is just caught so off guard that he starts running off. So Pete later on is to see this car parked nearby, and so Pete has a suspicion that this Harry guy could be this homeless guy. And come to find out, that's not really true. Because Pete later on is to see the homeless guy out there again with his dog, and then Harry is like, oh, so, like, is that the homeless guy that you were talking to me about earlier? Because eventually Pete confronts Harry about possibly being this homeless guy, And Harry's like, no, like I'm not that guy. But there seems to be like Peter wanting to figure out who this guy is because it's just some rando guy that they just met today. So they're just trying to put the pieces and the puzzle together. So we go on and we have Pete, who is to go into this party, and it seems like all of his friends are to be different. Pete is to go on, and all these kind of friends are collectively um, gonna like have some fun here, drinks and all kinds of stuff. And so it seems that one guy is weirdly dressed in this tuxedo, and so when looking at Pete, one of his friends, who of course is to be Archie, is to make fun of Pete for like, hey man, what a way to dress up. As this guy's just like, he's wearing this tuxedo, and like everyone else is all wearing like these normal clothes, and Pete just naturally assumed that like he didn't have to like dress to impress or anything. But like Archie all of a sudden is like, well, hey, like freaking like you couldn't have worn anything fancier. So Pete goes on and of course is like trying to talk or trying to have these stories, and he immediately gets cut off. To all of a sudden, like there's people that are just like, well, I'm just gonna go on and say what I want to say, and have this joke and high five, and like, oh wait a minute, oh Pete, you were saying something, and so Pete is to go on and have this story about him before he gets cut off again, about him making his way here and finding this like shady guy that when Pete was just nicely trying to ask for directions, we had this guy who was to go on and say "yarp," and so Pete was just like, "Well, like, could you give me like directions, like, please?" And Norma was like, "Yarp." Pete was like, "Okay." So so what happens here is while Pete is having this story, mentioning that he hopes to never have seen this guy again, all of a sudden this guy is right behind him, and he doesn't realize it, as if this is like Billy Crystal from City Slickers is like, the guy's right behind me, isn't he? Like, yeah, that happens all the time in the City Slickers movies. If you've ever seen them, where it's like where Bill is having this story about this one guy, like maybe like Curly, and all of a sudden Curly is right behind him, and he's like, he's right behind me, isn't he? He's like, yep. Like, okay. So all of a sudden Norman is going on and making a joke about Pete about like, hey, nice impression. Sounds great. And then Pete is just like, oh well, trying to like save himself, but like he's already jumped off that cliff, and there's nowhere to go from there. So Norman is going on and talking to George and kind of squaring some things off, because it seems that uh, Norman is to be like regularly a person that's around here, and these guys just kind of plop in here from time to time. So Pete, of course, is just having fun with people and who he thinks is just kind of having fun. And so it seems that we go on, and at one point we have Pete who kind of takes George aside and is telling him, it's like, well, hey, like I think I'm going to go on and propose to my girl Sonia soon. And George is like, really? And for Pete, it just kind of feels like he only told George, and that was it. It doesn't feel like he told anybody else. So we go on further into this party. Everybody's having a good time, and all of a sudden Pete is to like consistently get put down, and he's just like, okay, like he's so weirded out by these people. So Pete goes on and saying like, you know what, guys, I'm gonna call it a night. Like maybe I'll party a lot harder, um, like tomorrow. And so all of a sudden, Pete is walking up the stairs, and he of course is uh, walking next to Fig. And so Fig is telling Pete, it's like, you know what, like tonight you've been really like crap. Like you've been really rude, and you've been really this. Pete is just like, so what now? Fig is all of a sudden, yeah, you've been really crap. You've been really horrible to a lot of people. And this is your birthday party. So Pete is like, oh, okay. So Pete goes on to go and have a bath, go in this tub, and all of a sudden we have the I guess the random guy that they found named Harry, and all of a sudden we have Pete in this tub just kind of just doing his thing, and Harry just kind of walks in, and all he has on is this towel, and I guess he's just kind of waiting for his turn in this tub. And so Harry all of a sudden is to take his towel off, and he is just like he's swinging in the wind, so to speak. And so Harry is to talk about his own manhood, and so Pete all of a sudden is very uncomfortable to the point of him just like, I'm going to get the out of here. This is so really. So we have Pete that gets out of this tub and is to go to bed, and all of a sudden we find out that this guy Harry is to sleep on this like couch looking thing, or this kind of like it says it's a bed, or I think Harry says it's a bed, but it looks like some kind of couch. So Harry decides that he has to just that Harry's just going to sleep right next to Pete here, and it seems that immediately Harry's to go to sleep, and this guy is sleeping with his eyes open, just. It's so. Pete is just like, oh my god, like, I am so like weirded out by everything that's going on, like unbelievably. So cue them getting up the next day, getting breakfast ready, and so Harry's grabbing like quite a bit of breakfast, and like Pete's just kind of grabbing some things here and there. So all of a sudden we start to notice that Harry has the exact same hoodie that it seems that Pete had, and Pete is to go on and just be like, okay, like did Harry, did you take my hoodie? Like, hey man, like if you borrowed it, that's great and all, but like, it would have been nice if you asked, kind of thing. So Harry's like, well, no, like, if do you shop at this like certain place? Like, if no, then like, no, I just had the same hoodie. And so Pete immediately still thinking that this guy is the homeless guy. Pete double checks the tag and realizes that yeah, it's not the same hoodie. It just looks similar. So, and I'd be kind of weirded out by that too, to just kind of have this guy that I've never seen before in my life all of a sudden have like similar clothes that I'm wearing. I'm like, okay, this is like weird, but okay, whatever. So Pete goes on to eventually notice that every time it seems that Harry's to mention something, we or every time that Pete mentions something, Harry writes something in his notebook. And Pete is just kind of like, okay, what is he doing with the notebook thing? So Pete is to talk with George, and so George is to mention that this girl that was up at this party named Claire is all of a sudden missing. And George is to mention that Claire is to be very depressed. She mentioned this. George mentioned this to Pete before, after Pete is to go on and mention about the whole engagement thing to George, George is to mention to Pete that Claire is depressed. So Pete goes on and is to talk to George, and so George is mentioning that Claire had left, and like like she's just kind of depressed, and we're just gonna let her kind of go off and do her thing. And weirdly, the night before, we had Pete that was having this nightmare about Claire taking this news to herself, blaming Pete because of this, and Pete in the middle of the night is to wake up and is to just kind of double check if Claire is okay, and all of a sudden sees her in her bed without, without um, any kind of real clothing on, because maybe more than likely she doesn't sleep without clothing. So Pete is just trying to be like a nice friend and just trying to like quickly close the door, like he just wanted to know she was okay. So Pete is just kind of hearing that this girl was to leave, and like Pete was like, okay, well, why? Like, I want to make sure that she's okay. So Claire later shows up back at the party, and Pete is just very relieved. He's like, oh, thank God, like you're back. Thank God. Because like Pete thought that there was something horribly awry going on. And so when Pete gets back and sees Claire, he's like starting to like bawl his eyes out because he's like, oh my God, like my friends hate me, and this party's going like horrible and this and that. Uh, and so Pete is kind of confessing to Claire, and Claire is like, no, like it's all okay. Like, if anything, like I'm sure you're just like, it's a ball of nerves because you're having Sonia come and meet all of us, because like she's never met most of us before, and she's never met me before. And Pete is like, oh yeah, right, like I never told Sonia because Pete used to date Claire and things just didn't work out, and then Pete went on to date Sonia. And so Pete is now like telling Claire here, it's like, well, yeah, I never told Sonia about us like dating at some point. And so Claire is just like, well, that's okay. Like, honestly, if anything, like we can kind of come to that kind of talking moment um, when it has to come down to it. So we, but that comes a little bit further down the road. So that whole moment, but I just wanted to kind of get it out anyways. I want to kind of adjust this a little bit. There we go. So we, yeah, there we go. It's goofy. So we go into this story, and so Pete is to Pete is to go through more of this party, and it seems at one point they're gonna all go to this bar. And so Pete goes to this bar with his friends, and it seems that Pete is to want to like kind of like chase after this car consistently because his friends are trying to do this whole old joke where every time Pete tries to get to the car, the guys just try to like pump the gas. And so Pete's like, really? Like, this is kind of childish. And so all of a sudden, Pete finally is to like try to get to the car, and they just completely drive off on him, leaving both Pete and Harry to now have to like walk all the way to this bar. So that leaves some time for both Pete and both Harry to have this alone time, because Pete is to go on and take this picture of this guy's cell phone, and Pete is to know about this like photo. It looks very familiar. So Pete is kind of walking on with Harry, and so more and more Pete is realizing how shady Harry is, and the more and more that they're talking, the more uncomfortable like Pete is getting with Harry, to where he's like, you know what, like you need to like stop like being with us, like you need to leave me alone, and like I'm sick of you, like I'm already just like sick of you. So and this and that. I'm paraphrasing here, but like the breaking down of the dialogue is when they more and more talk about like Harry's trying to get alone moments with Pete to just try to get more information about Sonia or to get more information just about Pete, and like him going on and talking about him doing charity work and him doing things with refugees and stuff like that. Um, so but it also at some point they kind of use that against Pete, where it's like, hey man, like why are you just boasting about you working with refugees? And Pete's like, I'm not boasting, it's my work, it's my job. So we have Pete that all of a sudden is to just walk um, faster to get away from Harry, and there ends up being quite a bit of distance between Harry and Pete. And so all of a sudden we find that Harry is now running with this axe, and he's running full speed chasing after Pete here. So Harry's running with this axe chasing after Pete. And there was a moment before where Pete was with Archie, and Archie had this shotgun, and Archie was kind of like wearing the ski mask and had the shotgun, and so Archie was telling like Pete after he scared him, it's like, well, hey man, like the gun's not loaded, and like, hey, I know like how to use guns, like I learned how to use guns before I could read, and this and that. And so come to find out, after Archie keeps making these jokes and just keeps shoving this gun in front of Harry's face, all of a sudden Archie is then to realize, oh, I guess this shotgun was loaded. It was a double barrel, so yeah. So Pete is just like, oh my god, I'm going to seriously die on this trip. So all of a sudden we have Pete, who's running off into this forest, now running away from this seemingly axe murderer. Harry, who's has this axe, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna come after you, I'm running. I'm like, And so all of a sudden we have Pete that is now running for his life, making it all the way to this bar. And so now Harry is to come up to Pete and say, "Oh yeah, it was a joke, ha ha ha!" Like Archie was telling me to have done it before, and Pete is just like, "Oh my god, like you people are just the worst." So Pete goes into this bar and is talking to all these people, and so Archie is telling Pete to take a hit. Um, and so Pete goes on and is to go into the bathroom and take a snort of this coke. And all of a sudden, Pete is telling George that he wants him to be his best man. And we further and further go on to have these moments of these guys having these like karaoke moments, and they're singing along. So all of a sudden we have Pete, who's in this bar, and it seems that Archie is to mention that Pete is to take all the drugs. He was to have snorted all of the drugs, and now Archie's kind of ticked because he's like, "Hey man, I needed this to last a number of days." Pete's like, "Well, like I didn't take any of the drugs," and Harry's like, "Well, hey man, I accidentally knocked it over. Like I was the one that did it." And so Pete is like, "Oh, like Pete did it then." And so Archie's like, well, you know what? I got another stash, luckily, so it shouldn't be too bad. So all of a sudden, Harry is to come to Pete and kind of walk by him and tell him it's like, hey, like I saved you, because he knew that he messed up. So Pete is like, good God, like this never ends. I'm always gonna get blamed for everything. So at this point, like Pete is just waiting for Sonia to just be here because Pete, after this whole bar thing is going on, they decide to go on with the guy that they met before, Norman, to go on and shoot these pigeons, these birds. So we go on here and we have Pete mentioning that it's like, well, hey man, I've never like hit pigeons before, like it's been a while, and so they're going like, oh man, it's fine, like I'm sure you'll do fine. So all of a sudden they're bumping into Norman again, and so immediately like Pete is just like, oh my God, I'm not in like the best of graces with this guy, and so like I'm assuming that things are going to go horribly awry. So Pete is to go on, and like he's worried, like he's kind of looking around at all of his friends to kind of see if he's going to accidentally get shot at some point or something's going to happen, because these guys like have been in a bar and some of them are high, so he's more like watching out, thinking that he's going to get shot more than anything else, because things have gone bad here. Pete, all of a sudden every single bird is to come, and Pete cannot land a single one of these birds. And really, after he is to go on and not be able to do this, that's the next thing that people just start to hold against him. It's like, hey man, you couldn't hit a single one of these birds? And Peter's like, well, I told you guys that I've never gone on and I've never shot these birds. I've never gotten to, like, I've never really done any of this. It's been years. So like they're like, hey man, like we had to spend a lot of money getting all these birds together, and you couldn't shoot a single one of them. It's just, even to the point where Pete is apologizing to Norman, saying like, hey man, like even though I couldn't have shot a single one of these birds, like I had fun. And Norman's like, so we have Pete that of course makes it back to this manor, and so Sonia is finally there, and Pete is like, oh thank God you're here. Like, and it seems like a lot at first that it seems that like Pete and Sonia are like it doesn't seem like Sonia all of a sudden is easily and quickly turning on Pete, and until we get like further and further along here, where it seems like, oh, okay, well it seems at first like Sonia is taking Pete's side, but then all of a sudden there's just kind of like some points and stuff where we find out some things about Pete. So we go on into the story, and the entertainment is to come up for tonight. And so immediately, I guess we assume for this party that Pete is going to get some kind of stripper or some kind of dancer or something like that. So all of a sudden we find out that the actual entertainment is to have Harry come out with this plastic bag and consistently say wolf, wolf, wolf. And so the entertainment is really to be a guy that is dressed as Pete and is saying all of this stuff that really is to just be this thing of like random stuff about Pete from some random guy. And Pete all of a sudden is like, really? Like, you don't know anything about me. You're just coming up with all these like random things. Because at one point, Pete was to also have this medication or these pills that he took, and he notices that one of the pills was to be like changed, thinking that somebody's kind of taking his medication, and so immediately he accuses Harry here, but come to find out it's actually Archie, kind of messing with his stash. And so a lot of people are going on, and they're like, well, wait a minute, like, did you take your medication? And Pete's like, well, no, like, because I just like destroyed all of them. I crushed all of them because of just like somebody going on and trying to steal like my medication from me. So because like they kind of come out of these like kind of pull out things so he can tell when medication is going missing. So Pete is just kind of listening to this guy like talk about all the stuff that Pete was to see that was in this notebook. And so this fake Pete is going and talking to Claire and mentioning about how they used to be lovers. And Pete did go and tell Sonia about Claire and him being together. And Sonia was telling Pete, it's like, well, you told me about this before. And Pete was like, wait a minute, when did I do that? And so Sonia's like, well, when we started dating. And Pete is like, really? Like, okay, like, thank God that I actually said something that actually did, that I might have just forgotten about, because it seems that we have a ton of stories here of all these people who are kind of like to say all these things that Pete didn't actually say. For Pete to finally like not knowing if he, of course, was to not say anything about Claire, and evidently Sonia was to correct him. He's like, oh, thank God I did. I did say something. So now this fake Pete is to come on and do all these jokes and mention about his pills and how they're so important, and to mention about like Claire's past love and Sonia being having a possible engagement and this and that. And Sonia's like, well, wait a minute, you were gonna like, you wanted to propose, Pete? And Pete is like, oh yeah, like I wanted to propose to you, and like I wanted to like take this time to go on and try to do this, but it seems like everything about this was to just eventually have other people try to spoil this. So finally we have it where Pete is just done with Harry because he's ruining everything. And not only is like everybody just kind of chiming in, ruining like his entire birthday and spoiling things, and to the point now where this fake Pete is to say like, oh, I have a secret, and so finally Pete is like, well, fine, like I'll say what the secret is. So it seems that Harry is wearing this plastic bag on his head. And so Pete is to mention this secret about, at one point, he was to go on and prank call this girl that he knew. And I guess this girl was a little bit slow. And so they went on to prank call this girl one night. And I guess after they went on and prank called this girl, it seems that this girl went on to put a plastic bag over her head, and she ended up taking her own life, because I guess when they prank called her, they would bark like a dog. So this girl like felt so bad about this that she took her own life. And Harry is like, what are you talking about? And so Harry is to mention that he actually is not Harry, that he's some old friend of Pete's that he doesn't remember, and he thought that he would take this plastic bag and remind him about some old story that they had together, which evidently Pete had no clue what he's even talking about. And so Harry's saying, "Yeah, like we're old friends. Like we used to be uh like roomies together. What are you talking?" So all of a sudden Pete is just like, I don't know what this like I don't know what it is with this guy. So like we have Pete that is just so upset and just so to the point where like the jokes never end with this group, to where they go on and Pete finally's just had enough to where he takes this vase and he chucks it at Harry and knocks him down. For us to just go on and transition between both Sonia and Pete just driving off after this party is all over, and Pete is to now to tell Sonia here, it's like, well, you know what? I can completely understand if you no longer want to marry me. Like, I completely understand with how the last couple of days have kind of gone on, and a number of people has probably whispered sweet nothings to her, aka probably Harry. And so Pete can really understand if Sonia no longer wants to eventually marry Pete here. And Pete is kind of listening to or waiting for Sonia's response, and Sonia's like, "Well, like I guess we can really chalk up like that night of not really being the worst thing that you've ever done." And Pete is like, "Oh, okay, so like, in other words, you just will call it off." And Sonia's like, "No, like that was a joke. Like I'll marry you." And so Pete is just like, "Really? You will?" And she's like, "Yeah." And so Pete is just like, "Ah, okay." Like, Pete at this point, I don't know if he's lost his mind or whichever, but like that's just how the movie just ends, with that ending of like Pete like hopefully thinking that he's gonna like marry this girl and everything's gonna work out. But yeah, like nothing really ever actually gets revealed of um what was to just weirdly happen here. How like Pete all of a sudden was possibly in this vortex of something, that all of a sudden everything that he was to think was him being nice is all of a sudden having these people saying like, "Yeah, you're a bit of a jerk. You're a bit of a crap. Like what's going on?" To where like at some point Pete is talking to Archie, and like there's certain people that are like starting to be like kind of down on the lucks, kind of depressed, and so we have Pete trying to comfort Archie as Archie is kind of saying, it's like, well, hey, like because he went on and did this kind of weird joke, that it seemed that Sonya didn't like, and so Archie is going on and starting to like cry, because like I guess that joke was a little bit too far, and so Pete goes on and is to kind of comfort Archie and be like, no, like I think that joke was like okay, maybe like she just was to completely get it, but try to like try to have like a thing back at it. I don't know. So Archie is just like, well, you know what? I get it that I'm kind of like I'm slow, or I'm kind of like this, or I'm kind of. And Pete's like, no, 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 like no, like you're fine, man. Like everything's great. So Pete at some point is to kind of be like comforting to certain people and to go on and try to eventually try to comfort people as things are throughout this movie, to go on to be what they are, oddly. So with that said, let me know in the comments below how you felt about this film. Weirdly, I had to adjust a couple of minutes, or a couple of times within this review to just kind of like fix this thing as I would go on and just kind of adjust in my seat. So, I guess I can just kind of prepare that for the times in which that I go on and do this further and kind of prepare myself for eventually at some points um, having to consistently adjust or consistently figure out how to go on and do these things called reviews. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Let me know in the comments below whatever you want about all my friends hate me. Really, if there's something that I forgot about, because I'm sure there probably was, let me know about that also. I didn't do this in the perfect way that this movie is to present itself. A little bit all over the place, but that seems to usually be the pattern of the way in which I try to talk about movies or just kind of break this stuff down. Paraphrasing also, so not in the perfect sense of the film, but I tried to do the best I could. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.